2004 Oxford Classics version of Pride and Prejudice. Generally, you'll find this on the walls, surrounded by a bunch of other canonical texts we generally associate with the word classic. They're usually recognizable because they all have a mysterious portrait that reminds us of the text age and implies the importance. The back confirms this importance by promising us an introduction and explanatory notes written by an Austen expert, as well as bibliography and chronology of events to provide more context and information. In other words, we are asked to read Austen deeply, which in this case means historically. As we see from the back blurb, this depth is tied to her revered social commentary. We are reminded of Austen's long readership and introduced to the social and domestic themes of the text, while also being promised insight into truth and knowledge. Elizabeth and Darcy's relationship is only briefly mentioned at the end. However, one reason Austen is so interesting is that she's everywhere. She transcends the wall of intermediate Oxford classics and is claimed both by those in the Academy and by those outside of it. In fact, the battle over who reads Austen the right way has been fought for over 100 years. This conflation of Jane Austen and pop culture gets reconfigured and appropriated in interesting ways. Austen is a guide, a fashion, a way to live your life. Today, her texts come packaged as one of the classics, as steamy romance novels, as supernatural love stories and build-your-own-adventure-books, and of course, we even get Elizabeth Bennet's Zombie Hunter. However, rewriting Austen's text isn't the only way to adapt and change the way that we read them. Sometimes it can be as simple as asking her readers to think about how she fits amongst other genres, texts, and audiences. Here is one example of a recent book that attempts to do just this. This is the 2009 Harper Teen edition of Pride and Prejudice. Our mysterious Oxford Classics portrait is replaced by an equally mysterious, but kind of recognizable image of flowers. And of course, the image is recognizable because it resembles Stephenie Meyer's 2005 bestseller, Twilight. Here we see the iconic black, white, and red coloring, similar font and mirrored positioning of the authors' names. Only Austen doesn't get credit for being an esteemed bestseller. For those of you unfamiliar with Twilight, or those of us who like to pretend that we are, this is the basic story. Edward is a vampire. He's in love with the independent Bella, even though he knows he shouldn't be. However, after navigating the threats of high school, bloodlust, and some anticlimactic vampire battles, they decide they can't be apart. If it seems like comparing the two texts is a stretch, it becomes more clear when we find Bella constantly reading and referring to Jane Austen. Indeed, Maya herself has acknowledged that Twilight was largely inspired by both the plot and the characters of Pride and Prejudice. This is the Harper Teen back blurb. Unlike our Oxford Classics edition, we are asked to focus completely on the relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth. While we are again pointed to Austen's prestigious and historical readership, the focus here is on an appreciation of the text, and not a rigorous dissection of it. We are also introduced to the Harper Teen editions of Romeo and Juliet and Wuthering Heights. Like with the wall of Oxford Classics, Pride and Prejudice is put up against Western canonical texts. Here we are simply being asked to reframe our understanding of YA fiction amongst that canon. And in place of the Oxford edition's jargon-filled introduction and explanatory notes, we are given slightly less conventional materials to guide our reading. These extras encourage us to think beyond reading Austen historically and to think of her and her characters situated in today's world. This includes the Jane Austen Twilight Zone, a brief essay that compares the privileged and brooding natures of Darcy and Edward to leading men who fail to ignore their affections despite social expectations. Pride and Prejudice moves from being read as a domestic novel to being read as a romance novel. Next, we get a Cosmo-style quiz. Which Pride and Prejudice girl are you? Here, if you select mostly A's, you learn that you are Lydia. You're pretty and popular. B's, you're most like Mary. You read, you play music, but you should try to have more fun. And if you answer D, you get Elizabeth. Smart, pretty, and quick. Then we reach the segment titled 10 Things You Didn't Know About Jane Austen, where we learn about her family, her writing, and her many suitors. There's even a mention of the famed Tom Lefroy, the rumored interest that Becoming Jane is based around. In other words, we are asked to read Austen herself as a character in a romance. Perhaps most interesting of all of these extras is the one titled, What If Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy Lived Now and Were on Facebook? Where we learn that Elizabeth loves walking, reading, dancing, Gilmore Girls, Grey's Anatomy, and Wuthering Heights. She's also in a relationship with Mr. Darcy, and it's complicated. Mr. Darcy enjoys being shy and awkward, watching The West Wing, reading anything by Faulkner, and flossing every day. In this sense, we are not bound to a historical reading, but permitted to allow our contemporary reading habits to influence our reading of older texts. We read Austen differently because we've read Twilight. It's easy to laugh at the Harper Teen edition, but this chart shows how popular and approachable the YA market is. Indeed, a popular online commentary remarked, quote, "It's not that the new cover is Twilight-esque, it's that the old cover screams there will be a test." Ultimately, I want to point out that we can judge a book by its cover. Oxford classics make us think about history, but the Harper Teen edition permits us to make different connections. Austen's novel is put into conversation with other texts 21st century readers are reading, rather than remaining isolated and untouchable. Thank you.